Welcome everybody to another ATG webinar. My name is Shawn, Technical Evangelist at CTC Software, and today we're going to take a look at the BIM Managers Suite, covering this and as a comprehensive introduction to the suite itself. The Manager Suite really is a powerful set of tools. It's built around the concept of helping the BIM managers improve all your efficiencies, the ability to accomplish your tasks, and just it's meant to make your lives as BIM managers easier. The whole point is that we have intuitive interfaces, that we have workflow-based processes, and each of these tools can really step in and save you hours. And by hours, I sometimes literally mean weeks and months of time in some of those BIM management processes. We're going to take a look at a light demonstration of these tools, just kind of browse around the key functionality of the Manager Suite, and talk about some of the other things you might need to know as well. So we're going to take a look at identification of free and licensed tools. We are going to talk about some of the most popular tools, how you can get your hands on the suite, and a little bit about the suite deployment setup and kind of who the target market for these suites are. Okay, so with that, let's jump live into Revit. As I'm not a big fan of death by PowerPoint, we'll just take a look at this directly in the software itself. So up here in the CTC Software tab, once the suite is installed, and again, we'll talk about how to get access to the tools later, you'll see all of these tools in blue. This is the BIM Manager Suite. Now, a quick discussion as to who the target market is for this suite. This is BIM managers, right? Not everyday Revit users, those that are built around putting together projects. Those are very valuable members of the team, but they don't necessarily always know all of the inner workings and the required information that's needed to make Revit sing, to make it run perfectly. And so the BIM Manager Suite is built around the users who do know those inner workings, who understand the ramifications of changing a shared parameter or deleting certain views live from a project, some garbage views, and the general cleanup. That's all of what the BIM Manager is built around. And we'll take a look at some of those tools. In fact, we're going to talk about two primary workflows today. One is going to be the family library cleanup. And secondly, we're going to talk about project cleanup. Those two primary things are the two workflows we'll kind of cover. Before we jump too far into that though, as with all of our suites, we have free tools and licensed tools. The free tools are these lighter colored tools over here in the light blue. So things like Project Cleaner and Revision Cloud Remover, family tools, those are free. The darker colored icons then are those that are licensed. The ones that it requires either a standalone or a network license to be able to use the tools fully. Now, the suite itself does have a 14-day trial, of course. Now, all of our suites have the ability to get a 14-day trial. But the Manager Suite here, in its 14-day trial, a couple of the tools are intentionally a little bit nerfed. And we'll talk about what that looks like here in just a moment. But we do that because some of the tools are so powerful, in a couple of hours, you could use them to do massive amounts of cleanup, and you might not need to buy the suite. So we kind of intentionally nerf the tools. You can see the functionality, you can test them out, you can see what it would do, but to actually make some of the changes, you may have to purchase the suite. All right, let's talk about those two primary workflows that I was mentioning a moment ago. The first, oops, that was an accident. I didn't mean to bring that forward. The first workflow we're going to talk about is family library cleanup. And in general, that starts with a shared parameter file that's really solid, that's perfect, that's pristine, that has all the naming conventions you want it to have. Now, this is a theory we can have at a separate time, but we believe that every company out there, when you're working within your firm, you should have a single shared parameter file at play. Not one per discipline, not one per location. We believe you should have just the one. And so what we do is with the shared parameter manager, if you do happen to have more than one shared parameter file, you can combine them together with this tool. You can check for which parameter exists in which file. You can rename shared parameters in batch. And we'll take a look at that in a little while here. We're going to talk about the tools first, and then we'll actually open them up and take a look at a couple of these. Now, once your shared parameter file is all squared away, once you have it set up the way that you like it, the next logical step is also to make sure that all of your families in your library are using that exact same shared parameter file and the correct definition of shared parameters in general, especially if you've renamed. Now, that means you have to open up every single family that ever had been made that could be using those parameters and check to see if they're using your correct shared parameters. That takes a long time. And so to do that process automatically, or much more automatically, we use the tool here, Family Processor. So Shared Parameter Manager and Family Processor are two tools that work intentionally very closely together to help clean up your shared parameters and the families that use them throughout the entire library. True story, I was in a firm not long back that had about 4,000 families they were having troubles with. They had a 4,000 family library. It was an architecture and engineering firm, so all disciplines. And they had put a summer intern on the process of swapping out parameters, 25 different known problematic parameters across this entire library of families. And this poor kid didn't get through very many in a week. In fact, there was no chance they were going to finish up all 4,000 families in the summer that they were there. So we showed them Family Processor, set it up in about 20 minutes and told it to run, and it did all 4,000 families in about 2 hours. So you could talk about, 3 months for a summer, or a couple of hours of getting something done, and that's a serious time saving. So if you ever wanted to go in and change standards on that content, these two tools can help you achieve that in a morning. Now, in collaboration with that, your project files and your templates may already have schedules that are pre-built that need to go through and leverage those shared parameters as well. Everything needs to be built in that same shared parameter baseline. The families, the schedules, everything. So Schedule Parameter Resolver is a tool that's built around swapping the parameters that are in use in your schedules now, both on live projects and in your templates, in your container or warehouse files that you might be leveraging in a tool set like Hive to make sure that everybody's using the same corrected standards throughout the entire project set. So this trifecta of tools, Shared Parameter Manager, Family Processor, and Schedule Parameter Resolver are built around correcting and modifying any shared parameter settings you've got in place right now. Now, you might not want to just dive right in and make all those changes straight away. You may want to take a minute and actually check your library. Maybe ask it, how healthy is my family library? And how does it compare to the shared parameters that I do have set? Where do I have to focus my efforts? That's where this other tool here, the Family Checker, comes in. I'll oftentimes use this as a precursor to the Family Processor. I'll run the Family Checker on a handful of families. I'll kind of see what the general health is and see where I may have to focus my efforts. This can also be used when you download or when users may download content from outside your office. So if they're downloading manufacturer content, you might want to see where the manufacturer content is rather healthy and where it might need some extra love. The Family Checker goes way beyond just parameters. It actually checks flexibility and general standards and MEP connector information and all kinds of things to determine whether or not a family is of good quality. So again, this can be a good precursor to know exactly where you have to focus your efforts, and specifically for the parameters side and materialization side, Family Processor can be a great asset there. All right, so we've just talked about one of the primary workflows, which is effectively going through cleaning up your entire family library. The other part of this whole process is taking a look at cleaning up the projects themselves. And there's a number of tools here built around that concept. One of the first tools here is called Project Cleaner. It's a free tool, and it allows you to go through the exercise of deleting views and sheets and schedules and sometimes even links out of your project. Now that's an important step because, sometimes projects get a little unwieldy or get a little out of hand, especially as they go on and maybe you've got some new users on that project. And so the Project Cleaner can be a great tool to go in and just rapidly clean up some of the garbage views that may have made their way into the project and haven't been used for a while. In collaboration with that, sometimes I will also leverage the Project Cleaner if I'm sending a model out of house. So if I'm sending it to somebody else in another firm, I might clean up my model very drastically. I might delete most of the views, even sheets, even drafting views, because those are things that aren't necessarily relevant for somebody else linking my model. And if I go through the exercise with Project Cleaner of deleting all the garbage that they're not going to need, even some of those actual project views, then they're left with the model and maybe a handful of views that I want them to have that they can reference. And then that makes the model nice and lightweight for them to link. Similarly, when I receive models from outside my office, I might do the exact same thing. So these tools here, the Project Cleaner, is built around the concept of cleaning up a project's views, and in the views is where a lot of the file size comes from, not because the views themselves weigh a project down, but because views host a ton of elements like drafting lines, any other kind of line work, imported CAD files sometimes, text, dimensions, and all that does add to the actual weight of a project. Now, sometimes when I'm going through my projects, I may have new users or some that I might believe might be overriding dimensions. Or maybe you're an MEP engineer or structural engineer and you want to double check the architect's model that you're receiving. So those of you who are architectural understand others can use this tool on their own, on the models you send them to kind of check to see what's going on. There's a tool here called DIM Checker. This allows you to kind of find in the model, not kind of, it allows you to directly find in the model dimensions whose values have been overridden. Now, there's a lot of different reasons why you may want to override a dimension. Typical, see so-and-so, varies, things like that are no big deal. But I've seen plenty of times, way too often, unfortunately, I've seen where people have gone through and overridden dimensions to look like another value. The real value is 10 foot. They don't feel like coordinating it, so they type in 7 feet. They don't move the actual elements. They just override the value. Now, Revit has some checks in place to help avoid that, but there's ways of overriding that, unfortunately, and the DIM checker helps you derive if that's been done. It tells you exactly the dimension string, helps you zoom directly to it, so it can be a really great way for you to go through and check the health of your models, or to check models you're receiving as well. Another fantastic tool here is Import and Link Manager. Again, we're going on the theme here of project cleanup. So Project Cleaner, DIM Checker is a great way to check and see if there's any major errors you may have to have your team take a look at. Import and Link Manager over here as well. Now, Revit itself, if I go up to the Insert tab here, does have Manage Links. That's great. And it has Manage Images, also great. The problem is it doesn't have any kind of Manage Imports option here. The Import and Link Manager takes both Manage Links and Manage Images, and it also allows you to see Cad Imports. Now, we're definitely going to take a look at this tool because Cad Imports can be a big issue in a lot of our models, and there's very few ways of tracking that down. Natively in Revit, there's no way of tracking it down without some kind of custom add-in. This will help you find an imported CAD file and do some things with it, either removing it or converting it to become a link. That'll help you retain it, but maintain the model, and maintain the model as it being a link, which then lightens the load a bit, quite a bit. So great tool set for that. And then finally down here, there's kind of a little arc of project cleanup tools right here. Down here at the bottom right is one called Type Swapper. This tool is specifically built to go through and swap out when you load in a family, or especially system families, it's notorious for doing this. It'll often bring along for the ride another family. And Revit will give you this lovely little message saying this family is already there, so we're going to rename this family to parenthesis 1 or -1 or whatever the name is that it uses. Well, that's lovely that it does that, right? It keeps the original and gives you that copy, but then you have to go through and clean that up over time. So the Type Swapper is built around helping you clean those all up, and it'll swap out the families. It also helps you do things like getting rid of garbage dimension strings that you don't want, maybe that made their way in from other details copied from other design models, text types, which can often happen when somebody explodes AutoCAD in your files. Line styles, same thing. AutoCAD's exploding an AutoCAD file is notorious for bringing in additional line types, and you can use Type Swapper to fix all of that, as well as fill patterns and materials as well. At the same time of fixing it, it also purges those things out, so it can make that process incredibly efficient. So that's the actual suite itself. The tools that you're going to be using on a fairly regular basis are usually going to be things like Shared Parameter Manager, Family Processor, and Schedule Parameter Resolver. And then for family cleanup, and then for the actual project cleanup is Project Cleaner. I often run DIM Checker before sending models out of house for sure. Import Link Manager and Type Swapper. Those are the main tools that people use on a very regular basis. Now, obviously, there's two other tools here. Family tools can be a nice little helpful free set of tools that kind of goes along with Family Processor. After you've edited a whole bunch of families, there's often backup files left behind. One of the things this tool can do is help you clean up those backups. They can also help you do things like renaming CSV files to text files and things like that if you're doing a lot of type catalog style of work. And Rev Cloud Remover does exactly what it says. It deletes revision clouds out of the model. This can be great when you're submitting a final as-built to a client. You might want to remove all that revision history. This can help you go through the exercise of deleting all of those clouds and getting rid of them completely from the model without needing to go through view by view and try and find them and remove them. This will specifically go through and remove all of those marked as non-issued in the Revit default revision manager. So another little companion tool for end of project lifecycle project cleanup. Now we're going to take a look at a few of these tools in just a moment. Before I get going too far, however, I do want to make sure you know exactly how you can get your hands on these tools. So what I'm going to do is pull across onto this page, the ctcsoftware.com web page right here. ctcsoftware.com. If you go to that web page, you'll be brought right here to the main page. And you can either click on products here at the top and go to the BIM Manager Suite for 2019, or if you scroll down a little ways, you'll actually see a list of all the other tools here as well. And once again, you can click on BIM Manager Suite. Now, when you click into the BIM Manager Suite itself, there is an ability here at the bottom of the 4 buttons to try BIM Manager Suite for 14 days. So if you don't already have a license for it, you can certainly acquire one. You'll have to fill a little form, so we all know that you're getting access to the tools, and we can follow up with you later to see if you have any questions, but it gives you access to the download. As far as pricing goes, you'll definitely want to talk with the actual ATG account management team. They'll guarantee you all the best pricing you can possibly get on these particular tools. All right, let's go take a look at the actual suite itself. And we'll talk about licensing of these suites at the very, very end of this discussion today. By the way, while I'm going through any of these tools, or if you have any questions already popping into your mind, feel free to use the Zoom chat window, and I'll keep an eye on that. And any questions you ask, I'll try to answer them in line. Now we're going to take a look at a couple of tools. One of them that I was going to look at for sure is the Shared Parameter Manager. This is one of the very first tools most companies will run on their shared parameter file when using the Manager Suite. Just checking to see how their file is. You might be surprised at what's going on inside your shared parameter file. This can give you some great indications. This particular tool here, when I open it up, it looks on the lower left-hand side a lot like the out-of-the-box Shared Parameter Manager, but that's kind of where that ends. The whole rest of the dialog is all extra functionality that the out-of-the-box Revit Shared Parameter Management system does not have. Now, first off, if you wanted to make a brand new shared parameter file, you can do that. You can start from scratch if that was meaningful for you. Now, if I click new here, I'm just going to go ahead and throw a new shared parameter file on my desktop. I'm just going to name it demo SP. Okay, so for shared parameters, we're just going to call it demo SP, and I can do that. Now, the first thing you have to do in a shared parameter file is you have to add groups. I'm going to make a recommendation in this little discussion today. When you're making your groups for your shared parameters, name them the same as the group targets you can use inside of Revit. So when you're assigning parameters to a group in the Revit interface, when you're making a new parameter, use those exact same group names. Strongly recommend you do not use things like door or mechanical equipment or things like that. Name it based on the Revit group. So things like graphics, text, dimensions, identity data, materials and finishes. So when you're adding the groups over here, if you are starting from scratch, you can actually just click here, add default groups, and this will give you a list of all the groups you can use. So when I click OK, I'll get a list of all the default groups. This can be a great starting point for your shared parameter file, so you don't have to make these all by hand. Now, at the same time, you can also add a bunch of parameters to this. So if I was going to go to dimensions and I wanted to add parameters to the dimensions group right there, I can just click on add. And here, I can start giving it all the properties that I want. In fact, I can do a batch add of parameters. So things like length and width and thickness Now, the nice thing about this is you don't have to go add each one manually and make sure it's got all the right properties. If they're all common in definition, you can just go in here and say, these are all going to be length parameters, and here's the names of the parameters that I want, and click OK. And then click Create, and it'll make all of them directly. Now, for whatever reason, invariably, when I'm adding a bunch of parameters, I always misspell something. You may have noticed this here. I misspelled thickness. I put an extra S there that I wasn't expecting. Well, if you double click on a parameter here, or if you click modify, what it'll do is it'll open up the modify that parameter dialog. And you can change the name of parameters. You can change the definition. So if this was supposed to be some other type of parameter or related to some other discipline, I can make those modifications. This is something that out of the box, the only way to fix it is to delete it and then recreate it again from scratch. Well, that can be problematic. Either way, even if you do delete it and recreate it from scratch, it's going to make a new GUID, Global Unique Identifier, in the background for this. And it'll be the same thing here. When I fix this spelling and I click OK, it is going to assign a new GUID to it. This does mean that I have to go through all my families that may have been using the old thickness parameter and fix it to the new thickness parameter. But it means I didn't have to delete it and recreate it again from scratch, which is great when you're dealing with those discipline-specific things like circuiting and lighting properties or other electrical type properties or mechanical properties. You don't have to make sure you set all the values again. All you have to do is change the name. Or if I did add something in here and I said, hey, let's make a parameter called area, right? And I click create. Oh, shoot, I happen to put that in the wrong group. Well, no big deal. I can simply drag it up here to the dimensions group and regroup it. But the other thing that I did incorrectly was I set the wrong parameter type. So once again, normally out of the box, I'd have to delete this and recreate it. Whereas here, I can simply just change the parameter type. Now, once again, it's a new GUID, and I'll have to fix any families that may have tried to use that before. But it's a lot easier than deleting and recreating a whole bunch of parameters from scratch. Now let's take a look at what else this can do. This is just creating some parameters. If you've already got a shared parameter file at play, you may want to go through the exercise of using that correct shared parameter file here. So let's go to where I've got a few shared parameter files stored. Let's go Express Tool Settings, and I've got some shared parameters sitting out here, some old garbage that I need. Let's see, we'll use these ones. So in this case, if I expand this out, there's a whole bunch of parameters in this list. Fantastic. Well, what if I have a second shared parameter file? Well, let's go browse for another one here. Let's go browse to, maybe I've got just a parameter file for just doors, right? I want to know exactly what the differences are between these, where there's same names but different GUIDs, where I'm going to have conflicts. So if I go here to the top, I can actually filter for things that might be conflicting. And I can tell it to only show me conflicting parameters inside of here. Now, this doesn't look like it has any conflicts. I may have browsed to the incorrect shared parameter. Let's browse this again. Let's grab this old one over here. Looking for conflicts. There we go. This old parameter file. See, I've already fixed this once. That new parameter file actually had the correct stuff in it. This older file right here has conflicts between a lot of these different parameter names. And that is definitely a problem. So I can make some decisions. I can choose to either keep the ones on the right or keep the ones on the left. Now the ones on the left, if I wanted to get rid of those and keep the ones on the right side, what I can do is simply select a bunch of these guys here, right click, delete these from this one side. They're no longer conflicts, so they go away. Instead, what I might show are unique parameters. And again, telling it to only show me unique parameters. Once again, I can go in here and I can shift select a few of these and then just simply drag and drop between groups. Go from construction to construction, or go from dimensions over here. Maybe I grab this angle parameter and the threshold height all the way to the bottom, and then drag and drop this once again, dimensions. So I'm combining these files together. I can also then show between files not just conflicts, and there are still a few, but I can also show things like duplicate parameters. So those that are exactly the same between the files. And now I know these are the same because I just copied and pasted them between the two. So this whole entire process here of working with your shared parameters, renaming parameters, combining multiple shared parameter files together, being educated as to what the differences actually are from face value, that can save you tons of time in getting that base foundation of parameters all established. The next thing, oops, oh, I didn't mean to save that. Well, whatever, that's all right. I can always roll that back later, I suppose. The next major step here is working with the families themselves. So let's go find a family in this project and do something with it. I know that there's a family here. One of these doors up here is not from my current typical library of standards. So I'm going to edit this family out of this project. And we have other tools that can help you mass grab families from a project so you can harvest them. We'll talk about those in a future discussion. But for now, I'm just going to take this one family and I'm going to go take a look at some of its properties here. If I go into family types, I can see that this particular family has a parameter called panel material, which is great. But if I modify this parameter, what I'll notice is that this is a shared parameter. That's awesome, but it's text. Now, I don't want panel material to be text. I really want it to be a materials and finishes parameter, so I have to select the correct one from my shared parameter file. It's also set up correctly as a type parameter, which is great. The next one down, though, panel finish right here, this panel finish material, this one also is a shared parameter. It's not mine. I can tell you it's not mine because it gives me the ability to export this to my shared parameter file. So once again, I have to select it. At least it's the right material though, but it's not set up as an instance parameter. These are things that if I find content from outside my library, I have to go do by hand multiple times, over and over and over again for each family, manually checking all these parameters. And that has time cost to it. Well, what I might do instead is let's use the family processor tool to do all these same things. One more thing about this, by the way, if I look in the actual materials and finishes list, since this is really a material, this materials and finishes list shows me all of the materials that are actively in this family. Now this family, keep in mind, is a door. It's a double door. I have zero idea why Revit thinks it's a good idea for me to have a material called analytical slab surface or analytical floor surface. This is a wall-hosted family. There's others as well. Default light source. This thing actually is theoretically able to cast light, which is kind of squirrely to me. A whole bunch of mass parameters and phasing parameters, none of which are really useful. So my goal is going to be to go through and clean all of that up as well. So if I go into family processor, I might be processing just this one family, or I might be processing hundreds or thousands of families. What I'm going to do is basically start some brand new settings. Now, a cool feature here in Family Processor is it actually remembers your settings from session to session, and you can also save them so you can recall them for future use. So I can have, say, clean up Stanley doors as one of my processes. So whenever users do grab Stanley doors, I can clean that up, or clean up, Titus air handling systems or air handling units, air terminals, whatever, and I can convert their parameters over to mine in a standardized way. And I can run them through the exact same process over and over again, just by opening up the settings and running it. So I don't have to keep doing this by hand. The first time I set it up, it's going to take me a little bit of time because I have to know what I'm doing here. I have to know exactly the ramifications of my choices. But once I've done these, then I've made these choices, I don't want to have to make them again. So saving settings is great. There's a couple of things that I might do. I might want to make sure that I audit every single family when I open it. If I'm acquiring families from some unknown outside source like manufacturers, I definitely want to audit these. It's probably going to have to upgrade it as well because they probably are using an older version of Revit for their families, original families, so I may have to audit them. I can also force unit of measure settings to match a template family that I have someplace on my computer. This is great because if I wanted to say have all length values measured in inches, I can change that. Now it's going to automatically convert whenever it goes into a project to the project's units, but at least I can control this from a starting point as to what I want the family's units to be. That can make the workability in the family a whole lot easier. In the final processing, the very last steps, I can do things like sorting parameters by name within groups, so it auto-alphabetizes all the parameters. This is especially meaningful if I'm swapping parameters. Now, when I get up here to the change materials, I can start doing things like deleting a bunch of these materials out. Now, I might keep default. I might keep the wood lumber material here because it might be used on the door, and glass and plastic laminate, maybe the metal door handles and some things like that. But everything else, maybe exterior finish, but everything else I can delete directly from this family. So I can yank all of it out. I do have the ability, if I wanted to add some materials. So I could give it a material name and some basic properties to have it added into the family if I really wanted that. You can also change materials. One of the things I personally often will change is the default material. I like having the default material having a red and blue value of 0 and a green value of 127, the original value. So it's kind of a minty green kind of color, and then a 50% transparency so that when I'm looking at a family, if I see a glassy mint green colored solid in there someplace, I can understand that it still has a default material assigned to it. Now, when I load this into a project, because defaults exist in every single project already, it'll automatically default back to the gray material. But while I'm in the family editor, I can at least see where I may have to focus some efforts on material associations, which can be great. All right, over here on change parameters, this is the tab most people are the most interested in. So again, we just went through a shared parameter manager a moment ago, and we had fixed our shared parameter file to some degree. Now I may want to go through and fix the families based on that as well. So I've got my shared parameter file mapped here. I can do things like deleting of parameters out of my family. So one of them, that panel material here, was set up as text. I can't swap text over to being a material. That's not possible in Revit at all. So for this to work for this family, I actually have to delete panel material, and then I'm going to turn right back around and add a shared parameter called panel material. So I'm just going to go ahead and type in panel material here, and it'll actually sort through my entire shared parameter file. So I'm not browsing through all kinds of different categories, and it's going to find me the one that I want. Also notice this. I've grouped my shared parameter file just like I would the groups when it goes into the family. And so it knows what group it's in, and when I add it to my family, it goes, oh, you were already in materials and finishes? I'll put you right back there. In fact, if I want to do something like copyright, copyright is a text parameter. Now, text parameters normally will go to the text group, but I wanted this to go to identity data. And once again, when I add this down below, it'll automatically remember what group it's supposed to go to, which is fantastic. You can also do things like setting formulas. Like if I want the demo to be if I want the value to be copyright demo, 2018 or something, I can put that in there, and then that'll actually be the formula that it sets on a parameter. So you can specify formulas straight away. You don't have to create it first and then formalize it later. You can do it right away. You do have the ability to add family parameters. You can replace with shared parameters. This also, by the way, is a great spot where if you have a decent naming convention in your shared parameters, that this can save you a lot of time. If I was to go through here and grab a bunch of these parameters and just add them down below, most of these probably already exist in my shared parameter file. And so when it finds them, if the data types are the same and the name is the same, it'll automatically guarantee it's going to swap it and replace it with my shared parameters. So I'm not doing this by hand. Now this might be overkill. I may not have to swap all these, but I can do it super quickly. So why not just grab a bunch of these and have it swap all of them all in one step, right? I can grab a bunch of these right away and just add them all to my list. I'd probably add a lot more than what I'm doing here, but this is just for a quick discussion, right? The last tab here, parameters to change, is probably one of the other important tabs next to replace. I can replace and I can change. And the change is important because frame finish and panel finish are both supposed to become instance parameters. And so I'm going to set them both to instance. You also have the ability, if you want to set new formulas, to swap them to different groups, to change other things as well. But the main goal here is, in my case, I need to change these two instance parameters. At the very end over here, I can grab as many family files as I want. If I wanted to have every one of my door families out here processed, I could add them all to a full list and process them all in one step. I could click begin, go grab a coffee, come back, and it'll probably be done with just my doors portion of my library. Or I also have the ability here to just process my current family, the one that's back here, to test my settings and see what would happen if I do run this, and then take a look at the exact outcome of this. So you can do either one or the other. Now, while you're in the trial period, you will only be able to do multiple family files, and this option here for preview only will be checked. It won't actually let you save your settings. That's okay. It won't let you actually make saves to the families. You can still save your settings, and you can recall them when you buy the actual Manager Suite and get a full license. You'll be able to use these things that you've already set up directly. Let me just kind of quickly run this right now. It's going to give me a report about what it's going to do. When I click begin, it's actually going to go ahead and make all those changes to that background family. It doesn't take very long. Again, it took me longer probably to set it up than it's going to take to run in the one family. But once it's done, I can run those settings on any other family in the future, and that'll save me tons and tons of time. All right. It gives me a report telling me everything it succeeded on, or if there was a problem, it gives me a report that there was a problem. In fact, it had tried to set WD as the old panel material value to the new panel material parameter. Problem is, there's no WD material in my family, so if I wanted to have it, I'd have to go back and actually modify the family to have that material, using other settings here to kind of handle that. but this gives me a report and tells me what it did. In fact, if I wanted to commit these changes, I can go take a look at the family itself, and you'll start seeing things now like frame finish and panel finish are default materials. Panel material is actually a material. They're, by default here, I mean they're instance parameters. If I was to do something like panel width and check its properties, it is actually my shared parameter, and I can tell because export is not an option. Scrolling all the way down to identity data, here you'll see copyright has that formula that I set on it, demo 2018. So it puts those values in straight away. It set all those things up in a matter of seconds. And again, I can run this now all over the place. So if you were using, say, another one of the tools by ATG, the Electrical Mechanical Productivity Pack, you could take tools like this and you could make outside content that is not from a pack like that or not from your library conform to your library. That's a great way of leveraging this tool set. And that's actually a reason why whenever you're talking to any of the ATG sales individuals about a tool set like the Electrical Mechanical Productivity Pack, they're probably talking to you also about the Manager Suite, because Family Processor is a great tool set to use in collaboration with that. So you can also use content from outside your library if need be. And for your own uses, if you're not an MEP engineer, this can work great also for just your own libraries when users are grabbing things like furniture from outside your library or doors from a different manufacturer. Again, same kind of examples there. All right, let's talk about a little bit more project cleanup. We're going to take a look at a tool here called DIM Checker and just see what that tool does. And then we're going to look at one final tool before we clean up today, which is Import and Link Manager. All right, so in my floor plan, I'm in a code plan right now, but I think someplace in this model has dimensions. This one actually does have a few. There's probably some down here in a different floor plan elsewhere. In fact, let's take a look. Yeah, these are all just, you know, normalized dimensions, nothing super spectacular there. If I go to DIM Checker, I just want to double check and make sure nothing's overridden. So I've got DIM Checker set up to look for any dimensions whose value has been replaced with text. That way I'm not getting dimensions that are real, that are good, that are quality. I'm excluding any dimensions that are saying things like typical or see so-and-so. I don't care about those. So what I'm going to do is just hit search here. It's going to go through and find a number of dimensions. Now I'm in the code plan right now, 01 code plan, but apparently in 01 floor plan, there's some dimensions that look like they've been overridden. In fact, there's a multi-segment dimension out there, 1 of 5, 2, 3, and 4 of 5, where the actual value does not align with the replaced text value. Someone did some dirty secret there on how to actually override this, and they've got a whole bunch of very inaccurate values. And that's a huge problem. So let's go find this. I don't know exactly where this is in the floor plan, so I'm just going to click on Show. What it will do is open up that 01 floor plan right there, and it zooms me in directly to where those dimensions happen to be. And if I wasn't still certain exactly which ones it was, I could click Select, and it'll actually highlight them on screen for me. Now the dimension checker by the name just checks to see what's going on. This is not going to give me a magic correct it all button, because whoever did this in the first place needs to take responsibility for this, so I can actually save a report out and hand this back to the team and say, guys, this is a problem. You need to fix this. Make the walls accurate. Ultimately, what's probably going to happen is this office wall right here will end up in alignment with that column right there, given how off these dimensions are. We've lost easily 3 feet of space here. So that's probably going to shorten this up quite considerably. But they need to actually work on this and get this coordinated to the nominal dimensions so that the actual model is reporting correctly as well. Same thing here. Someone overrode 15 foot 10 3/8 to 16 feet. I don't know where that is either. So I'm going to go ahead and show this. And once again, it'll navigate me to exactly where this is in the model. And again, if I wasn't sure exactly which dimension string it was, I can show it. But once again, this can all be a part of that same saved report. It tells them what view it's in, tells them the element ID, so they can select it themselves from something like manage and select by element ID, and they can go through and make those corrections. The final tool that we're going to talk about in today's discussion here is the Import and Link Manager. And again, this is just an overview of a few of the tools on Manager Suite. I'm bringing these up because these are some popular tools that hopefully you can get use out of instantly on your projects or on your families. The Import and Link Manager here, again, helps you find imported elements in the model. So if I click on Import and Link Manager, This is going to scan my model, finds all imports, all links, and you can see a report of them sitting right over here. And with this one, if I kind of expand this out a little bit, let's actually sort these by name real quick. Notice how I've got this imported file here. Let's figure out what view this is on. And it tells you the view either by host view or by the work set if it's view hosted. So in this case, I've got a lower level DWG in here 3 times. There's a base model lower level DWG for this project. It's been imported. What probably happened is somebody probably imported it to this view, this actual existing floor plan view to trace it. They did properly pin it in place, but they imported it to current view only. And then what happened is somebody duplicated that view a couple of times to make some working views, and that import got duplicated because they did duplicate with detailing. And that's a problem, right? We don't want people duplicating with detailing when there's DWGs in the view, or duplicating with detailing in most cases anyway for a working view, especially not if they're not going to clean up after themselves. So this is a huge problem. These 2 views right here, I'm just going to straight up and get rid of them. These 2 DWGs, not the views. The views will stay, but the DWGs are going to go away. So I'm just going to remove those straight away. I can delete them. I don't have to go find them in the floor plan, see if they're visually turned off or on. I can just clean them up. This other DWG right here, this lower level drawing that's actually imported, I'm going to fix it. In fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to swap and reload this from the correct file. And I can browse to where this is supposed to go. So I can go out here to my... that's not the right place. Where did I put that? Must be in my D drive. Working folder, building, CAD files. Here we go. There's my base model lower level. Okay, so I've got the model has been repathed, and I can choose what the insertion method is going to be. So I can swap it in place as an import, or I can convert it to a link. And now, instead of deleting it and replacing it and losing all my visibility settings, I have the ability here, as best as possible, to just make it talk to that link. Now, if that link, the original file, has drastically changed, then I might lose some visibility controls, but for the most part, it's going to try to retain as much as it can. There's other options you have here as well, like correcting lines off axis if that wasn't done right away correctly in the first place, or the colors, making everything black and white, or whatever the options are you want. You can modify those, and then it converts it in place from an import and turns it to a link. That's huge. There's some other things going on here that might be problematic as well. I'm noticing that over here to the right, there's a whole lot of elements that are not pinned in place. And once somebody places a link or an import, they really should pin them all. And so what I can do is hit the little pin button right there, and it will go through and pin every single one of them in place, right where they belong. Now, if a person does need to move them or correct them, it's a very intentional unpin and move, but not an accidental move. One other thing here, I'm noticing something a little squirrely. This Revit link right here, you can usually identify the Revit links pretty quickly because they're numbered. They always number their links. You can also tell over here that the type is a Revit link. But this happens to be an AS18 file. This is an architectural site in Revit 2018. I can tell from the file naming convention right there. This architectural site file, probably linked in for visibility purposes, happens to be on the interior work set. In fact, there's a number of DWGs down here that are on the interior work set as well, accidentally, I'm sure. At least I would hope it was accidental. I can actually fix that. I can change the work set directly. I can say, you're going to go to the site work set. Or all of these other CAD links down here, I could select all of them and say, you guys are all going to go to the CAD link work set. So I'm saving myself time. I'm not navigating around an entire model and trying to track these things down and checking them out individually one by one. I can see them all from a single interface, imports and links side by side. And yes, this does also include image imports, but I can find all of those. I can know exactly what views they're in if they're view specific and fix them. I can modify all those settings. All right. Well, hopefully this was a good overview for you on the Manager Suite. There's just a couple of other details I do want to talk about. The Manager Suite itself, when you download it, if you do get that trial, it just has one installation, one MSI file. That will automatically apply to Revit 2016 through Revit 2019. So you don't have to install it 4 different times with 4 different downloads. That typically makes your IT team very happy. Now, you won't be installing the Manager Suite everywhere. You'll be installing it on a select few computers. Those of you who are BIM managers will most likely get it. But just the same, you do want to make sure that your IT team can install these as easily as possible. And actually, for all of our tools, that's true. When you download them, there's one download, one install, and it automatically applies to all versions of Revit. Now, with all of these general suites here, you have the ability of choosing standalone or network installations. Standalone or network licensing. The installation is the same either way. It's just a licensing model you choose. Now, I typically recommend for most of these tools network licensing, but obviously it's up to you, and you can talk with your account executive at ATG about what that might look like for you, what kind of licensing you need, and they can also talk about the pricing. But the nice thing about network licensing with Manager Suite, you may only need 1 or 2 network licenses of this to serve all of your BIM managers across your entire company. A lot of mid to small size companies get by with just 1. And that's great because you can share that license. You won't be necessarily in these tools day in, day out, 24/7, 365. You're going to use them when you need them to do some basic cleanup tasks, checking dimensions on a model. And it won't take you long to do that. When you shut the tool down, it gives the license back. So network licensing is one of the best flexibility methods you've got for managing these licenses here with the BIM Manager Suite. I think I've covered everything about Manager Suite that I had planned to talk about today. Keeping an eye over there on that chat window about any questions, and I did notice a question that came through. It asked, if the dimension says equal, will it change it to a number? And I think that was in reference to the actual DIM checker tool here. Now, once again, DIM checker is not changing anything. It's just giving you a report telling you what stuff is, what the actual value is. Now, if somebody manually overrode a dimension with EQ, then it would tell me that this text has been replaced because it wasn't ignoring it over here. It wasn't excluding it. But if a person was dimensioning something and it just said EQ, then it's not going to show up in the report here because it's actually using the real value. In the background, Revit still has the actual value there. So EQ is unaffected. But again, even if it was saying EQ, dimension checker doesn't change anything. So it's not toggling. I could go into the dimension settings if I wanted to myself, once I knew where that string was, and modify the dimension settings to do that. But DIM checker is just checking. That's all it's going to do is look and give you a report back telling you what users have potentially overridden about a dimension in the model. All right, I'm keeping an eye on that questions window here. I'm going to jump over to the questions tab inside of the little PowerPoint here. Once again, my name is Shawn Zerbis. I'm a technical evangelist at CTC Software, the makers of the CTC Express tools. ATG is our US exclusive reseller for these. So if you have any questions about pricing and whatnot, they are definitely the team to contact about that. I am keeping an eye on that questions window again. So if you did have any further questions, I am all about answering those. All right. Thank you all for your time today. I don't see any other questions rolling through. Thank you all for your time. I really do appreciate the time you give us for these webinars. Hopefully they're informative for you, and you can use these to help make the decision as to whether or not the Manager Suite is the best suite for you. Thank you, and have a fantastic day.